Welcome to Gray Eminence Media. Let's get into it.
Let me just reiterate how delighted we are to have you here, not just on Bloomberg property, but here in Singapore, on your way from the ASEAN summits to the G20. So, with that in mind, let me begin with this question. The Indo-Pacific was already a complex place when you began your first term as Prime Minister in 2015. Today, it seems more demanding in every possible way. Geopolitics, trade, energy, climate, security. How much harder do you find it now navigating the conditions in this region?
Well, this region, as you say, has always been complex. But one of the things that is helpful to Canada in navigating the complexities here is that we have significantly increased our presence, our focus, our attention, our engagement in the region.
Okay.
Over the past years, we've been developing and launched last year our Indo-Pacific strategy that looks at all those various axes as places we need to advance, whether it's increasing our diplomatic presence, whether it's increasing our economic and investment presence and partner.
Okay, get into specifics. You're sounding like a management consultant saying a bunch of nothing.
Ships, particularly around infrastructure, whether it's stepping up on climate change with its clean energy solutions, whether it's stepping up on security as well. As I was at the ASEAN conference yesterday, a couple of leaders in our bilaterals highlighted how pleased they were that Canada had military frigates sailing through both the South China Sea, Taiwan Straits, on its way to continue ship-to-ship interdiction with Operation Neon around North Korea. So we are very aware of the complexities here, but we also know, and this was one of the things that was highlighted yesterday in my ASEAN conversations, the concerns of countries here are connected to and not dissimilar from the concerns that we're facing at home. And being able to work on global issues together is one of the only ways we're going to be able to solve them.
You have many priorities in this region. Several of them are well articulated in your Indo-Pacific strategy. What's at the top of the list right now?
Top of the list, benefits for Canadians in jobs, in opportunities, in connections. Many of my conversations today were about and with investors and companies that are looking to do more in Canada as this region is looking to diversify and understanding that the stability, the prosperity, the opportunities in Canada, which is oft overlooked, really give opportunities for investment. The flip side is making the case to Canadians that greater engagement in this part of the world where the economies are growing fast and the opportunities are real is going to be benefiting as well. So I'm an unabashed progressive, but I know that making sure that people are confident about their finances and their future and their kids' future is at the heart of building societies that are not run or overrun by anxieties and fears, which we've seen the consequences elsewhere around the world, and Canada has so far been able to avoid.
That is a good and appropriate answer for a Canadian Prime Minister. How is probably the appropriate follow-up question. If there's one thing you need to do to achieve that objective here specifically, and I would like to get into specifics, what is it?
Well, we're doing it. It's following up on the Indo-Pacific strategy. It's making sure that we're
What is the
making
strategy?
sure we're engaging directly with leaders, with businesses, with decision makers.
Okay, hopefully the host presses him on specifics. So we'll see, because this guy's just going to continue rambling on and really generic and broad, statements. So hopefully the host pins him down, but let's see what happens.
To make sure that they understand that Canada is not just a source of solutions, but a source of opportunities for them. It is so easy to be aware of opportunities right in front of our noses, but as we've seen through COVID, through climate, through geopolitical instability that are leading to challenges on food security and energy, everything is interconnected, and finding partners that are willing to engage in constructive, productive ways. One of the things that Canadians deeply understand
Yeah, I don't think the host is impressed if you look at his face.
is the global economy is not a zero-sum game. It is
Really?
not just possible, it is only optimal when everyone gets to draw benefits, whether it's on trade deals, whether it's on business deals. If you're in it for the short term, you can do win-lose. But if you want to create stability in a long-lasting way, you have to make people
The
understand
host
that
is losing
we
his
are
patience.
all deeply invested in each other's success. And that's a bit of a shift from some of the ways we've seen the global economy acting over the past decades. But climate and pandemic and the need for
Yeah,
more
okay,
resilient,
you already said
diversified
that.
supply chains is driving that. And being there to show up and continually make that case is the most important thing that we can do.
I can't think of a country in the world that doesn't want to get more out of its relationships in the Indo-Pacific region. Which, you spoke of partners willing to engage. Which of the partners with whom you spoke, I presume in Jakarta, and will subsequently speak with in India, are most willing to engage? Which countries are stepping up?
I'm biased right now because I just came from Indonesia, but my conversations with President Widodo, with whom we'll be hopefully, but very much on track to sign a free trade deal within the next 12 months. As a precursor to the free trade agreement that we're going to be signing with ASEAN, hopefully the year after. It's a lot for Mary to deliver on, but we're going to be able to do it because Canada has figured out, even this era of protectionism, how to get free trade deals done. And the key to that,
Yeah, free trade deals. I wonder if these free trade deals are really going to benefit Canadians. Probably not.
is, and it's certainly something that President Widodo understood and understands. Trade, as you all know, creates growth, but it doesn't inherently make sure that that growth reaches everyone within communities and societies. And that's up to both policymakers and partners to make sure that people are feeling the benefits, because it goes to not just economic stability, but political and democratic and community security as well. So that pitch that we've continually made, that trade can be about win-win, it can be about mutual benefits, flies in the face.
He said democratic security. Trade does not only spur growth, but enhances or increases different facets of security, such as democratic security, which is completely false. We see communist China, the CCP, doing very well, and they are not democratic whatsoever. And they are the second largest economy in the world, way ahead of Trudeau's economy. So this must be one of his neo-liberal talking points.
Face of the narratives that people are worried about around globalization over the past years, that demonstrates that that we're able to engage. So I'm very bullish on Canada, Indonesia right now, but that might just be recency bias.
Mr. Prime Minister, how would you characterize Canada's relationship with China?
Obviously, we've had a challenging few years, as many people had. The arbitrary detention of 2 Canadians for political reasons put a real chill on the relationship. But China is one of the most important economies in the world, and is not a country that anyone can simply ignore. We have to be eyes wide open as we engage. We have to look for where we're going to compete, where we're going to be very clear and contest based on our values, based on principles that Canadians expect us to adhere to. But we also need to look at where we actually can cooperate and work together. And one of the examples of that happened just last December, where Montreal hosted the Chinese COP15 on biodiversity. So Canada and China worked together to make sure that we came out of that COP15 on nature with incredibly ambitious targets of protecting 30% of the oceans and land on the planet by 2030. And that required us to work together and constructively. And on issues like climate, we are going to have to make sure we're working together.
So would you say the relationship is improving, stable, or deteriorating?
I would say it's probably stable. There's certainly lots of room for improvement. It's not deteriorating right now, but it has not gotten as much better as perhaps we would have liked to after the Michael situation was resolved, partially because there are real concerns around foreign interference that we're dealing with.
Most of Canada's allies are distancing themselves in one way or another from China. Would you, if you could, take a different path, forging closer ties and better access to Chinese markets for Canadian companies, for investors, for Canadian exporters and farmers?
You know, it's interesting because the way it's always been framed for our allies, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, is the desire of access to markets, particularly the growing and engaged Chinese middle class that represents, a tremendous benefit for us. And over the past many years, there have been lots of friendly and sometimes less than friendly competition between allied countries, whether it's Canada versus the US versus Australia versus Europe for, can we get more beef in to China, we get more pork. And China's been very thoughtful about making sure that they just would play us off each other just a little bit in strategic ways that has been very effective. So for me, and certainly for the G7 as well.
I think China took that playbook from you guys, right? Western powers playing off of different competing interests, divide and conquer, right? So it's the same thing with China. They're looking at the long game, and they're acting accordingly. And just like Blackface Trudeau said, it's this type of strategy worked very well for China in terms of letting Western powers compete with each other to gain a bigger share of the Chinese market.
We've had conversations around this. The understanding that we cannot simply be trying to elbow each other out of the way for access to the Chinese market, but we need to be more thoughtful and concerted in how we move forward. Nuanced in our approaches is really the only way to go. I don't think the idea of crossing our arms and turning our backs on any part of the world is something that is good for the Canadian economy or Canadian people, but not being naive, being very deliberate about how we do it, and working in concert with our friends and allies is the right way to do it.
You mentioned the chill that settled onto the Canadian-Chinese relationship after the case of the two Michaels, as it's known. You've also made reference to interference in Canadian democracy. Is there political space in Canada for a rapprochement with China?
A rapprochement, no. Certainly not at this particular moment. China has made decisions over the past years that have made it more difficult, not just for Canada, but for other countries, to engage in ways. I will admit, in 2015, the conversations we had was about working towards a free trade deal with China, working towards those sorts of things. But in real terms, the choices and the actions of China have made that more difficult. But like I said, we will continue to look for ways to engage constructively in ways of mutual benefit and try and rebuild a positive relationship in the interest of Canadians. But we're not going to be naive about it.
By all accounts, Mr. Prime Minister, the interference in Canadian democracy was worse than similar efforts by China in the UK and in Australia. You appointed a special rapporteur to investigate. So far, however, your government has either been reluctant or slow to pass a foreign agent registry law. How come?
This is a complex issue with no easy answers. And a lot of people have glommed onto, oh, if we get a foreign agent registry, suddenly everything will be simpler and easy to do.
Yeah, so try to weasel yourself out of this one. Let's see what he says. So what would be wrong with a foreign agent registry in Canada to help mitigate election interference? So let's see what he has to say. Maybe there's a lot of money involved, right? If him and his goons decided to enact this type of a registry that might affect people's pockets. Let's see.
Hasn't solved everything in any place it's been brought in. It's an important tool, and we're absolutely looking at it. But there are...
It's an important tool, and we're looking at it. Why not implement it? Well, yeah, it's not going to solve everything, right? I mean, when you're tackling crime, right, law enforcement is only one aspect of tackling crime, right? You also have the judicial system. You also have a jury of your peers, right? So there's a lot of elements when you're trying to tackle crime and mitigate crime and solve crime. So it's the same thing in this situation. So this registry is not, it's not a magic bullet. Of course, like with any situation, with any situation, it's not going to solve everything, but it probably is a very effective tool in, stopping or at least reducing whatever interference China is conducting. But like I said before, if they do have this registry implemented, it could affect people's pockets. So you notice how he's so nervous about this question and how he stumbled in the very beginning.
Stories. There are moments of our history where creating registers of foreigners in a given country or in Canada even has led to less than optimal outcomes. And we just need to be careful about those sorts of things. But one of the things that
right, we need to be careful with that. But when you were, especially in Canada, when you were forcibly assimilating these Indigenous children in Canada into these Western schools, I don't know, man. That was pretty recent. There are people that are still alive that went through that. But you want to hide behind this cloak of progressivism and, well, there's a history of registering, foreign aliens and blah, blah, blah. This has nothing to do with discrimination or racism or anything like that. This is something to do with protecting Canadians. Now, obviously, I'm not Canadian. But if you were a Canadian looking at this, I would be very alarmed. Something ain't right. Something ain't right with this guy.
that we have done since 2015, particularly having watched the 2016 election in the United States, the 2017 presidential election in France, is we stood up before our 2019 and 2021 elections, a monitoring panel of top security agencies and civil servants to make sure there was no interference in our elections. We've moved forward on oversight over all our national security bodies and actions by parliamentarians. We've taken significant steps to counter and discern interference, including not just interference in our democratic institutions, but in business, in our academic
like what?
And not just
like
from
what?
China, but from a range of countries. And that's going to
like what?
Something that we work.
Oh
if I
my
may
God.
follow up on that point, a foreign agent registry seems like a simple and appropriate response to political
Right.
interference by another country. And it's just a way for the government and Canadians by extension to know what lobbyists on behalf of other countries are doing in Canada. It's not a tax.
Right, the lobbyists from other countries. They filling up them Canadian pockets, Trudeau and all the government executives, they want that bag. They want that bag.
On foreigners, and it's not an internment policy.
Yeah, exactly.
So why not?
Would it apply to Americans?
If they were lobbying on behalf of a foreign government, would it
Right.
not? I don't know.
Well, these are the kinds of questions we do have to know before we actually move forward on it, and that's why we're taking.
He's saying he doesn't know because he's not the prime minister, you fool. Why are you asking a private citizen his opinion on the matter? Like, he doesn't know. Like, he doesn't represent the Canadian government. Come on, man.
seriously and looking at it as it moves.
The United States has had such a practice in place since 1938. Australia put one in place following its episode, shall we
And
say?
yet, both of those countries continue to have foreign interference on an ongoing basis.
Oh, it's not to suggest that foreign interference is going to go away, but it does give you a better idea of what's going on under the hood.
No, it's one tool, assuming that everyone declares.
It's one tool. Yes, that's what the host essentially implied. It doesn't solve everything, but it allows you to see what's under the hood. So the host already admitted that fact, and you're just trying to gaslight the situation and trying to put words in the host's mouth. You know, he didn't say that this registry is going to solve all interference. This is his way of protecting his pockets and the pockets of people in the government that are very close to him. It's pretty disgusting.
Themselves and signs up for that registry. Listen, we're not going to get into policy debates over this right now, but as I said,
why not?
it's something that
Why
we
not?
are looking.
Why not? Why not? Because you're losing right now.
Yeah, something we're consulting on, something we're planning on moving forward with. So
At what point do you figure?
soon.
Soon is... Never say soon to a
Okay,
journalist.
there we go.
You see his little buddies, his team, his executive team, they're laughing as soon as he said soon, because they know that it ain't gonna be soon. Not at all. Oh, look at this corrupt politician. It's really nasty.
But journalists that expect me to make major policy announcements on the other side of the world at 6 o'clock in the morning back home, they're perhaps going to be disappointed.
People are glued to their televisions for a reason.
I'm sure they are.
Mr. Prime Minister, one of the 5 goals of your government's Indo-Pacific strategy is expanding trade, investment, and supply chain resilience. The problem, of course, is that China is overwhelmingly Canada's biggest trading partner in this region, some 5 times larger than India. How realistic is it for Canada, or any other country for that matter, to materially diversify its trading relationships in the short run when China remains so dominant?
You could ask that question about Canada regarding another country. 80% of our trade is with the United States, if not even more. It is the fact of how our economy works. And we work extremely well with the Americans, but we are also looking to diversify. It's a constant push to be able to make sure that we're...
You're not answering the question, you slimy slime ball. He's asking about how can you turn this around in the short term in regards to diversifying your trade without relying on China so much. And then he goes on to say, well, 80% of our trade it's conducted with Americans, and we do very well with them. See, you see how he distracts and tries to pull the wool over your eye. It's very good.
We're creating more resilient relationships around the world. That doesn't mean we're not going to be trading with the United States to a very large degree. It doesn't,
That wasn't the
certainly doesn't
question,
mean we're not going to be trading with
goofball.
China to a very large degree. But in part of the learning we all made through COVID is that the emphasis we had on maximizing the efficiency of our supply chains, those just-in-time delivery, everything working down to the minute to make it as efficient as possible, left us with a real dearth of resiliency. And making sure that as we look at trading partners, as we look at supply chains, we have redundancy, diversity, and resilience in our supply chains is essential. One of the best and easiest ways to do that is to make sure that we do have different partners, that we have strong relationships and opportunities to grow with.
If 80% with a single trading partner in the case of the United States is, and I'm inferring here, too much, what is appropriate?
Mhm.
What day or what year are you talking about? It will be constantly reevaluated.
An objective, let's put it that way.
An objective is to make sure that we have a strong economy that is able to withstand a downturn in one of our trading partners without instantly downturning ourselves.
He's so
Probably a
clueless.
challenge with the United States, where we are alert to every twitch and grunt of the elephant beside us, as my father once spoke of to Congress. But being able to have a reliance on more than just one partner is wise from a business perspective and wise from a political perspective.
Where has, or let me put it differently, which countries in this part of the world with which you want to grow Canada's trading relationship have been most receptive thus far?
Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore, where we're establishing a gateway to the entire region focus here because that's a natural role here. There has been just a tremendously positive reception from across the region because of historical ties, because of diaspora reasons, but also because people are looking at some of the challenges of the large geopolitical players and saying, you know, hedging our bets with a country that maybe is slightly smaller but reliable and proximate to other places is useful.
Another of the 5 goals in the Indo-Pacific strategy is enhancing security. Australia, the UK, India, Japan, and Korea have all partnered with the United States in security alliances covering the Indo-Pacific. Why not Canada?
We have one of the strongest security alliances in the world with the United States already in NORAD. We are the only 2 countries who do not solely control their own homeland security, their own territorial security. It is a joint, shared responsibility between.
That wasn't the question. Independently, as Canada, what type of security alliances and pacts are you making in the Indo-Pacific region? However, the journalist is just playing with niceties because we all know that Canada is a client state of the US, and any type of security alliance that the US makes, it virtually applies to Canada as well. So that's why Canada hasn't, I guess, struck out on their own in creating these sophisticated alliances within the Indo-Pacific region, because there doesn't need to be. If I was Cambodia, right, and I secured a very complex security alliance with the U.S., I don't need to go out of my way and do a new one with a country like Canada. It makes no sense when I already have U.S. guarantees.
Between Canada and the United States, we both protect our territories. That's a unique security arrangement that extends to other parts of the world, and we are closely aligned in everything we do here in the Indo-Pacific, including, as I mentioned, our increased presence of military here.
But would it not be of benefit to Canada, as it clearly seems to be to the UK or the Australians, to pick 2, or the Koreans or the Japanese, to formalize a relationship with your allies in the region?
But we've signed security partnerships with Japan, with Korea, with other countries in the region. So we are.
And these deals that he's talking about are most likely multilateral deals, and it's not a Canada standalone type of a security pact.
Are engaging, working closely with Australia as a Five Eyes partner. We will continue to work in multiple ways and multiple layers, fully engaged in the region.
Do you share the concerns that those countries clearly have over Chinese expansionism in the future of Taiwan?
Yes, that's one of the reasons why we're part of the maritime passages through the Taiwan Straits.
The U.S. has spearheaded a multinational effort to ban exports of semiconductor technology. Do you accept the rationale for that policy, namely that China was misusing such technology for military purposes, or does China have a point when it accuses the United States of trying to throttle its economy?
I think one of the things that I heard a lot from people here in the ASEAN economies in Southeast Asia is a desire to make sure that we're not exacerbating differences between
No
various
backbone, no
economic
spine.
giants. Canada is closely allied with the United States and always will be. We will work together on shared security and our values.
Yeah, you better say
At the
that.
same time, we'll make our own decisions about how,
No, you
how
won't.
we move forward in ways that make sense to
Oh,
us.
little
One
buddy,
of
you
the ways
following
that makes
us.
sense is for us to be
You're following the U.S.
working as part of the semiconductor supply chains in North America. We're establishing a real role for Canada in that universe as there are decisions made to diversify. But you can make decisions to diversify without turning it into geopolitical conflict, and that's certainly what we're doing.
Am I to understand by what you just said that in your mind, the United States, with the support of the Netherlands and Japan, may be going too far?
No, that's not what
These
I said.
restrictions?
I actually avoided answering the question.
I actually avoided answering that question with this little smirk and the laugh from his executive team. Who says that? Like, we all get that, you know, politicians give political answers and they do a really good job in somersaulting over a question or sliding underneath the question or, you know, just essentially avoiding a question. But who just outright says, well, no, I didn't answer your question on purpose, and I'm such a bad, you know, I'm such a cool guy for doing that. Okay, let's see how the host reacts.
So I'll ask you point blank, are they going too far?
And I will continue to avoid answering the question.
That's crazy. And I will continue. Just wow, how is this not breaking news? Honestly, you're the Prime Minister of Canada, and you can't take tough questions. You know, this is why Vivek Ramaswamy is such a popular presidential candidate right now, or at least a competitive Republican nominee, because he's willing to answer any question and answer those questions unapologetically, as well as go onto any platform for him to be interviewed. And I guess that's what makes the difference between Americans and Canadians. I mean, I don't know, Canada. You gotta change this.
Canada has been called out repeatedly for failing to meet the target for defense spending, 2% of GDP, that all NATO members at the time agreed to meet in 2014. According to a Pentagon document obtained earlier this year by the Washington Post, you privately told NATO members that Canada will never meet the 2% target. Is that what you said?
I talked repeatedly about the challenges that we have with a growing economy, that we will continue investing as we have in historic levels in our defense. We recently purchasing 88 F-35 fighter jets. It was under a previous conservative government that percentage of spending on defense dipped below 1%. We have consistently been increasing it even as our economy is growing. But we've always contested that simple math doesn't accurately reflect the capacities and the capabilities and the contributions that Canada has made. We are the 6th largest contributor in terms of NATO. We have been there for every single mission.
Yeah, why aren't you number two?
Announced massive NATO NORAD modernization recently, and we will continue to step up in a world where security and defense is unfortunately more important now than it has been in a long time. So we will continue to have these conversations with our partners and allies in NATO. We will continue to be there, showing up, and we will continue to increase our spending.
They want you.
What is this fool talking about? Security and defense was a lot more pertinent in the early 2000s, right? 2001, 2005, 2009, 2010, 11, 12, even 13 and 14, right? I would argue that security, at least for the Western world, was at far greater risk in the early 2000s. So for him to say that the security situation is more prevalent or more pertinent today than it was, quote unquote, than it was long ago, or it hasn't been this important in a long time, that's just inaccurate. Now, maybe for Ukraine, that's factual, but he's thinking possibly in a Eastern European mindset. Listen, right? You represent Canada. In terms of security, Canadians are more secure now than they were in 2002, 2005, 2007. And that's just a fact.
To spend 2% of GDP. I'll repeat the question. You answered it to a degree. You spoke to them about the challenges, economic, perhaps in some respects, cultural, perhaps in other respects. Did that amount to never meeting the 2% target?
Canada will continue to invest more in defense. We will continue to make sure we're there and we show up, and we're part of the important role we have of protecting democracies around the world. We also know there's lots of things we need to do to protect democracies, and not all of them involves more soldiers.
Well, if Canada's economy continues to grow, then yes, on a percentage basis, you will spend more on defense. But people do want to know, Mr. Prime Minister, why, with war raging in Ukraine, no end in sight to Russian aggression, with China vowing to retake Taiwan, with sovereignty in the Arctic at risk, would Canada not want to meet that commitment now?
Well, you started by mentioning Ukraine, for example. Canada has been one of the most generous supporters of the war in Ukraine, over the past years. Over the past year, we have invested billions of dollars in strengthening Ukraine's economy, in ensuring that they can continue to keep the lights on, ensuring that we've sent military supports, humanitarian supports, that we're welcoming in.
All that money could have went to Canadians.
Refugees and people who are fleeing from the war while their husbands and brothers are fighting. None of those efforts count within that 2% target, for example. We will continue to step up in real and meaningful ways across the spectrum as needed. That's what Canadians expect, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
You know, there's a reason, of course, that I've been pressing you on this issue. It's a sore spot with many Canadians. It's certainly a sore spot with Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. It's a sore spot with the Americans, with the Germans, with other members of NATO.
You're going to tell me it's a sore spot with many Canadians.
Well, I do believe it is a sore spot with many Canadians.
Can you
and I'm sure
can you
other
point
Canadians,
to me an opposition leader who is committed to meet the 2%?
No, but the opposition leader doesn't necessarily represent the interests and desires of all Canadians or the other Canadians.
Any opposition leader, any party, any political party in Canada that is committed to meet that 2%.
Why is it relevant whether Mr. Poilievre or anyone else in a position of political leadership in Canada should have or should not have committed to meeting the 2% target?
Well, no, you framed it as something that Canadians are.
No, I also framed it in terms.
Listen, you fool. He's telling you that everyday Canadians feel like X, Y, and Z is a sore spot. And he was going to get into the specifics, and then you rudely interrupted him, and you were saying that what other this is how out of touch you are, that you just look at other people in terms of the opposition. So whether that's essentially you look at Canadian society as the opposition, whether it's opposing political parties, opposing politicians, just politics in general. He's talking about everyday Canadians, and now political entities, parties, and individuals in Canada are different from everyday Canadians. So you see how Trudeau kind of try to snake him and try to confuse him, and he's talking about, well, what other uh, political parties or politicians are committed to this 2% of funding in NATO. But that wasn't his point. His point was to kind of highlight everyday Canadians, not the people in parliament. This ain't rocket science, but he's really good at manipulating people.
In terms of the Americans, in terms of NATO leadership, in terms of the Germans, for example, the Poles, the Finns and the Swedes who are just joining NATO, who are all stepping up in very meaningful ways, well over and above, not all, but that 2% target. They want to know.
We are continuing to step up. We are continuing to invest more than ever before in defense. We are on track to reach a larger degree of spending than we've had before, and we're going to continue to do that. That's what people expect from Canada, and we're going to continue to do it.
We are, Mr. Prime Minister, suddenly living in a world of economic statecraft. Instead of the consensus on free trade and efficiency that shaped the global economy for at least a couple of decades, the new mantra is investing tax dollars in strategic technologies and strategic industries. Is this smart policy? Do you believe in it?
Yes, to a certain extent, and in the right context. We, over the past number of years, we made deliberate and clear policy choices as a government to invest in clean tech, in green transformation of our economies, in better energy sources, while at the same time our closest trading partner went through a 4-year stretch where investment in green or fighting climate change was simply not a priority. So President Biden has stepped up with a massive Inflation Reduction Act that is all about trying to catch up to where other countries like Canada have been moving over the past while. The IRA is an important tool for boosting our capacity to meet the needs of a net zero world. And Canada is serious and committed to being part of that net zero transition. And yes, we do have to put money on the table to bring in companies like Volkswagen. But even as we do that, we know that the economic growth that comes from that, the benefits, will accrue to Canadians in less than 5 years. At the same time as we are going to be leading on battery supply chains. We went from 6th in the world to battery supply chains a few years ago to now being 2nd in the world in battery supply chains, and we're continuing to grow on that. And that does take an industrial policy and investment. But the choices to do that when we have the critical minerals needed, we have the manufacturing know-how in the auto sector, we have the trade deals to ensure that we're able to get those out to partners and allies around the world, just makes sense. We know if we are going to build that greener economy of the future, it can't just all rest on individuals trying to save energy in their homes, which is an important piece of it, or businesses switching to green technologies without governments also taking a leading role in that. And that's what we've done as a country, because we know fighting climate change isn't just a moral imperative, it's actually an economic opportunity. And over the past 8 years, it has become increasingly clear that that's exactly the competitive advantage that Canada's been able to build. And other countries are trying to catch up.
Why isn't Canada competing for arguably the most strategic and potentially most valuable industry of all, semiconductors? If Arizona, if Utah, if New York, if Ohio can have a new fab built by Intel or Micron or TSMC or Samsung, why can't Ontario or Quebec?
Canada has already the largest semiconductor packaging plant in North America, in Bromont, Quebec. And for those who don't know semiconductors, packaging is not just wrapping it in bubble wrap. It's okay, you guys know. It's actually how you assemble the chips so they can deliver the functions necessary. It's an important part of the semiconductor supply chain. And as we do in so many things.
Yeah, that's packaging. It's different from what he was asking.
As Donald Trump found out when he tried to rip up NAFTA, the integration of the Canadian and American economy is so deep that we will all benefit from investments on both sides of the border in semiconductors.
Your government, Mr. Prime Minister, has set the world's most ambitious targets for immigration. While the rest of the West is mostly closing its borders, Canada will welcome some 1.5 million people from 2023 through 2025. This should be something to celebrate, but instead, a deep resentment is taking hold in Canada. Why?
Okay, that makes for a good headline, but it's not accurate. Canadians remain a place that is more positively inclined towards immigration than just about anywhere else in the world. And that's because we have been incredibly successful at welcoming and integrating people who have then turned around and built families and communities and a growing economy for the country. And while other parts of the world have turned against immigration, we've seen it as a real benefit. Now, it doesn't mean it's all rosy. We are facing real challenges around housing, but it's not just an issue around immigration, because people are facing housing challenges everywhere in the world. Singapore is facing certain challenges around housing, as all you know, and it's not purely linked to immigration. Economic growth, space, zoning, all sorts of different things are contributed. Underinvestments by successive governments over the past few decades in Canada has certainly contributed to that as well. But the good thing around housing is it's a solvable problem. We have solved it before when people returned from the end of World War II, when baby boomers reached the age where they're all trying to buy homes and get their own place. We saw massive construction of housing in Canada, and indeed across many of our democracies. And that is what we're focused on doing again. We will solve this problem by working with all different orders of government, with partners in the private sector, with partners in the nonprofit sector to make.
Okay. I can't take too much more of this guy. Well, what do you guys think? Leave a comment below. Have a good one.